I am JJWalsh in Hiroshima. So excited once again to talk with the amazing Azby Brown. Thank you so much for joining, Azby.
It's great to be here again. I always love talking with you, and now you're an old friend. So
Ah,
it's great just to catch up.
amazing. And it was so wonderful to be with you in Fukushima and have you guiding us around and sharing your expertise from your SafeCast experience over the last 12 years going up to that area. It was so insightful. I have so many great stories and inspiration. I think that was Asby for me, that was something that was really surprising is I was getting inspired from what's happening in Fukushima that I think can be applied in other parts of Japan. So it wasn't just about the recovery for Fukushima. It was like Fukushima becoming a great example for other parts of Japan and the world. It was really exciting.
Yeah, I'm happy that you came away with that because that's how I feel more and more. I mean, at the beginning, the first couple of years, there was just this great sense of need and they needed help. And for several years now, when I go, it's like, what can I learn from these people? They have
Yeah.
so much they've done, accomplished, met challenges, figured things out, putting things together, innovating, and there's a lot we can learn from them. And I think, yeah, I'm glad you came away with that same impression.
Yeah, absolutely. But today we are talking about really in your wheelhouse about house design in Japan. And
Mm.
it's kind of a preview of what you're going to talk about at the Minka Summit this weekend, right, Asby?
Yes, it is. And with the caveat that I'm still thinking about it. I always, until the last minute, I'm putting together my thoughts and how it'll go together. And I know the rest of the team is waiting for me to send my presentation, but uh, they'll get it tomorrow. But yeah, I think I'm looking at some other aspects, that I think I want to share with people. So,
Yeah. And we've got so many beautiful photos today
mm,
of places that are connected to your topic
yeah,
about restoring and renovating old homes and how that connects to rebuilding and reinvigorating communities around Japan, right?
yeah. How can this, restoring a minka or a machiya, how can this actually help make a difference? And we've seen, I think I've seen enough examples, some good examples of where it really has, because it's been done well. Good oversight, some visionary people doing it, and other instances where you say, yeah, why didn't this really happen? And it depends on what people are trying to accomplish. And when I talk about preservation, the big question that I always want to pose at the beginning is, what are we trying to preserve? It's not just, wood, a house. It's something about culture and something about passing down culture. So this is a fairly intangible thing. But I think old houses, old buildings, old communities, old towns really can teach us about who we are and where we came from in a way that other uh, books or movies really can't. So that's what I want to think about and talk about this weekend.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a beautiful way to say it. And it's
Mm,
it's so much more than just a house,
mm.
right?
Right. Um, some people only want just a house, and that's fine. And I think, if whatever, if they're going to turn it into a restaurant or they're going to live in it, it's going to be a vacation home. That's also fine. For me, if it preserves the building, preserves something about the environment and that history, at least for the next generation, then that's very, very worthwhile, I think. Uh, but again, it's a bit different than, how can we find ways that the process of recognizing, restoring, understanding, and appreciating older buildings, how can that serve as kind of an anchor for revitalizing communities? How can that serve as an anchor for reminding us about our culture, about what's valuable? And the irony is, of course, I'm not Japanese and you're not Japanese, and there's a lot of people we know who are involved, who will be participating at the Minka Summit, who are not Japanese, and it's very interesting that there's so much energy on the part of non-Japanese doing that. But at the same time, there are lots of Japanese doing it as well, and that's something we shouldn't forget. So it would be great to sort of link up with more of the Japanese local practitioners as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And now you've sent me so many beautiful photos.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna put one up here. Is
Yeah.
this, you said Iwami Ginzan in Shimane? Is that
Yes,
right?
Iwami Ginzan. Um, Iwami Ginzan is very interesting because it was the site of very important silver mines during the Edo period, which were very tightly controlled. The miners themselves, they were men. They had contracts apparently, but it was a very, very grueling lifestyle with not much freedom at all. Their comings and goings was very tightly controlled. There were also geisha, etc., women there working basically in the sex industry for them. And there was a fair amount of violence there as well. But this became one of the, a fairly early Japanese World Heritage Site for UNESCO. And I guess this is back, I'm thinking, 15 years ago. And I should check the date before I make my presentation. About 15 years ago. And what we've seen in other cases where places, and it's not just Japan, other places in the world where sites become World Heritage, often they become over touristed and somehow destroyed by that. And this is something that, our mutual colleague Alex Carr talks about very well. For instance, in Shirakawa-go, they almost lost their status because they were building these huge concrete, bus parking lots and things. So when this process was beginning and Iwami Ginzan became on the list, being proposed, some local merchants. There's a company called Gungendo, which is kind of brilliant. They are you familiar with that company? They use traditional textiles, traditional dyeing and weaving, and make sort of new fashionable garments from that. And they also make other things, household items, as well, with very traditional techniques, but sort of a new spirit of design. And they're from there. The family's is from there. And the Matsuba family. And they sort of took the leadership on this, said, hey, we don't want to ruin this town because of this new status and tourism that's going to destroy it. Let's set an example. And one of the first things they did was restore an old samurai house to use as a kind of ryokan. It's called abeke. And it's kind of a special thing. It's actually like a membership. It's kind of an unusual format, but it's beautiful. And a moment ago, you showed a picture of the kitchen there. It's beautifully restored. Hospitality is fantastic. This is where everybody eats, in this kitchen. And look at the Komodo. Look at that stove. It's got like 6 fireboxes, and they're cooking that. And, there's another wood burning stove there. It's just fantastic. And that's where people come together, and the food is fabulous.
Oh my gosh,
And
I love it. So are they
yeah,
all Kamado in different designs? There,
in
I
this
see
one over here,
3.
basically, this is you can see 3 fireboxes on this side, and I think on the opposite side there's a couple more. And there, I don't think they have a gas range in the whole kitchen. They may, but I
Wow.
don't think they do. But the main thing is they're cooking on the Komodo, and of course that implements a kind of sense of time for this. Learning how to cook rice on a Komodo, that's a big deal, right? So
Yeah.
that they're
I
doing.
was I was talking with Kyle Holsuter the other day,
Yeah, he's great.
and they use one in their house. They don't use gas anywhere in the whole
Yeah.
permaculture
Yeah,
center.
he's made this great, stove system, and he makes a lot of ovens too, right? He's a great
Yeah,
oven builder, and it's a wonderful
amazing.
technique. And there's other people who are doing that. But the thing is that the company is headquartered there, and that's where they actually make things. So there was the Kayabuki farmhouse you saw there. That actually is attached to the company as a kind of meeting place, a cultural place for the community. And I actually think they moved it from somewhere else and reconstructed, restored it. And it's sort of a beautiful thing right there, off the main road in town, as part, well integrated into this company that's making these wonderful traditional items, for people who live now, for people like us. And the other thing they did was they said, we are going to try to set an example for how buildings in the main town should be restored. And because it can get very trashy very easily. So they got a few properties. They have their main store there, which they did the facade, of course, very beautifully. They actually had the designer Sato Taku, who's a fantastic product and graphic and marketing design person. He was one of the people who started the 2121 Design Site Museum in Tokyo, and he's brilliant. And he was the design director and did it in this wonderful, earthy but witty way. And then other buildings, in the town that they have had an influence on restoring in a very high quality, very traditional way. So basically, in many situations, the most important thing is to have someone to set an example and to show people what can be done. And in this case, the Matsubas, and of course it's connected with their company, but of course with their roots in the town, they did that, and it's really remarkable. And I think over time, these things they take on a life of their own. People get it, and they want to do the same thing. So it's kind of a wonderful example. There's probably a few more pictures I sent you about that we can look at. There's the town,
Yeah.
the
Is this
street.
I just love all of these baskets.
Yeah, that's
They're
at
just
Abeke.
gorgeous.
That's at Abeke. That's at this restored samurai house.
Okay.
And everything's like this there. Even if you look at the paving on the floor there, it's tile, it's traditional tile, but it's a modern paving. But it works beautifully with everything else. And they've left the wall in a very wabi-sabi kind of aged way, and find all these things. That's the other thing. What a lot of people don't realize is many towns, smaller towns, rural towns, where one may find an old farmhouse that looks attractive, you will find lots of old stuff, farm implements, maybe some garments, some furnishings, baskets, and all sorts of other things. So these all help tell the story, and to me, in a very palpable way, convey the sensibility and the skill and the materiality of what life was like. At least hopefully it's an inspiration that people can say, yes, this is beautiful stuff, and my life should be as beautiful.
Yeah, and a lot of, like, the basket weaving, so many different shapes, like, what was that for? They all look very specific. It's
They
all,
are very
connected
specific,
to
right?
culture, right?
A lot of that is fairly, I mean, I would say lost knowledge, but I can see some, I know these are scoops, some are strainers, there's one that's sort of a ring that's kind of a cushion for a hot pot. And, little by little, you can learn what they're for. But it's true. This is an incredible language of design, a language of functionality. And of course, that functionality is based on the lifestyle of the time, and what they were using and eating, and how they were preparing things, and how they were living. So a lot of it is now for us, just the beauty of the form and how it's made remains. But these were all everyday utilitarian implements. And if they were woven from bamboo, or maybe some things are woven from straw or something else, these were not intended to be used for that long. They had a replacement cycle. So these were, they would be made beautifully, but after a while you'd have to make a new one. So that's kind of a different approach
But
to
then it would
art.
go back to nature. How
Back to
beautiful is
nature. It's
that,
got
right?
the
Instead of a
compost
plastic
heap.
bucket.
Yep, it's in the compost heap. It's going to be burned for fuel. The ashes are going to be used somehow. It all goes back, or maybe the bamboo becomes something else, right? So it's a remarkable, remarkable thing. So
Yeah,
mm,
fantastic. And
mm.
then is this the same area,
This
or
is
is this
also there. This is also part of this, the abike, the samurai house. And they've have places, bedrooms scattered around, and there's like a kura, and there's some other stuff, and they just did this sort of minimal remodel in a way where you can't really tell what's new and what's old, which is just really brilliant. So of course there's this wood stove. This is kind of like a place for people to sit, downstairs, and I think upstairs here are bedrooms. So it's kind of like a public area, and you can just sort of sit there whenever and read or have
I
some tea.
like what they've done with the shoji doors. Instead of putting white paper in, they've just put glass behind?
Well, I think this is original glass. I almost sent you some photos of the original glass. It's this beautiful old sort of pattern frosted glass in many of the places. So this was probably original there, and and but again, I don't know. It's done so well that you can't really tell. It all sits right, and feels like it belongs, and feels like it was there forever. So that's kind of a magic of design. You have to have a very well-developed design sensibility to be able to do that. So I think
Yeah.
they're great, and other people can learn from them.
Yeah.
Mm.
And like we saw at the Minka Summit last year, there were some of these wood fire stove cellars there. That
Yeah,
seems to be a key component for a lot of people that move out to the rural areas
yeah,
to have these wood burning stoves, right?
and even talking with people recently that I'm talking with about potential projects and things. um, there is the practical side, because many people do have wood available to use for firewood. But there's also this sensibility, the emotional side, that you don't want to use, the fossil fuels. You don't want to have propane gas or whatever the alternative would is, because as you know, in rural areas, if you're going to use gas for heating, it's going to be propane, because there's rarely going to be a city gas line there. Or if you're going to use electricity, then you're really using a lot of electricity, and especially in these houses. But also, a wood fire has a different feeling, and it has an aroma. Uh, in the old days, these wood fires, especially like in a rory or an open fire, they were so smoky. It was really bad for people's health, and it's fortunate that we don't have to have that. But it really feels nice, right? The part of a kind of mindfulness as well, that you have to tend the fire. You push on a switch and the gas comes on. That's one thing, but for a wood fire, it's like, oh, we stir the fire. Oh, we put another piece of wood. It's something that you're having a kind of dialogue with, and it's a nice rhythm to that as well. So I definitely understand that. There's a lot of other options, pellet stoves and other sort of hybrid things that are more automated. But in this case, this is an antique pot-bellied stove, which were basically introduced to Japan in the Meiji period. Westerners brought them and adapted, and they became very common throughout the country, especially in cold weather places.
Yeah.
And it also has a kind of story and history to it. So
Yeah, it looks like, and this is something I love when you're seeing people remodel these old Japanese houses, is they're not afraid to add things that look like they won't fit, but once they get them in there, they actually look really nice. That fusion of different influences, right?
well, you've talked to a lot of people who are doing this sort of thing, and I bet you've gotten, people have different reactions to it. Some people probably really agonize, is it terrible if I put the stove here? Is it terrible? Will it ruin it? But, people should use their imagination and improvise and do whatever suits them. And if it suits, what you want, the place you live, what you're designing and building for yourself, or possibly for your family, that can be one of the more the deeper expressions of your identity and what's important to you. So yeah, if the wood stove is important, definitely do the wood stove. If you want to paint the walls blue, like some people we know, paint the walls blue. I think this is, people should not be shy to do that. And I do think there's kind of a divide, or a kind of a interesting, let's say, an evolutionary branch that's happened between sort of what I would say is a local and maybe even authentic Japanese approach to doing things, and then the sort of things that foreigners, non-Japanese, are more likely to want to introduce. I mean, everybody wants comfort. People want some good lighting, even if they like the general atmosphere of dim lighting. Most of the time, they want good lighting. But I feel like maybe often non-Japanese are more adventurous about how much they were willing to change what's actually going on in the space. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't have any hard evidence for that, but just looking around and seeing a lot,
No,
that's
no,
just.
that's yeah, that's the sense that I get. And
Mm,
like visiting John Stolenmeyer's
mm,
redesign of an old house and
yeah,
showroom, and how he got rid of the Engawa. He
yeah,
just made the inside space bigger. And there's a lot of people that love to keep the Engawa because that's a beautiful
I keep
design
it.
of old houses, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I like both ways. Everybody's
Yeah,
making very
that's
good
the thing. Yeah.
decisions.
So yeah, it's so different because again, we're fortunate. We're living in a time where we have that sort of social freedom to do things the way we want, and even Japanese people expect that. I mean, this it's tied to this renewed sense of rights and individuality. And even though Japan is still maybe less individualistic than America, that is probably a good thing. People still feel like, yeah, they should be able to do things the way they want, just the way I like it. And in the old days, I mean, in the past in Japan and certainly in most countries, there was a lot of judgment uh, about what people are doing. Oh, he painted the walls blue. You can't do that. So, and things sort of. On the other hand, things had this coherence because they were done in a very similar way, a similar language, similar feeling. Differences in old farmhouses may primarily be indicating the age of the house or the status of the occupants. But otherwise, they were basically in a very, very similar form. And when you went into them, people were living in a very similar way. So now everybody can live differently. It's like, Stuart has the screening room upstairs in, his house and stuff. So this is kind of really interesting. So
Yeah.
maybe there is a divergence, and maybe we'll see a kind of evolution of that. And
Yeah,
maybe that
you
will
you
feed back.
mentioned it before too about international residents feeling
Yeah,
less inhibited to break rules.
I think so.
It's
Um,
something I've seen in international residents' houses, remodel those houses. They'll put a table on tatami, for example, but with a rug underneath. And
with a rug.
I think it can work. I mean, that
Now,
seems like a tried rule that you should never break, like in traditional Japanese houses.
as
But it's
as
sometimes
long as they're
works.
not wearing their shoes there, right?
Yeah,
No, but
not
but
wearing
look,
shoes. No,
but I,
no.
but I know that many Japanese households end up doing the same thing, putting a rug down and putting, like, they'll have a Japanese room, a tatami room, and then eventually the kid gets old enough and they need a room to do their homework, so they get the desk and they put a rug on the tatami and they put a desk on it. So that is not that uncommon. But yeah, if you're gonna put a table, you should have a wooden floor underneath it. I think, just because you'll end up
I
with
mean, we had
dimples
this
in the tatami.
conversation when we were remodeling our house because we
Yeah,
had a few tatami rooms and we had a few hardwood floors. And
yeah,
the remodeler said it's impossible or very difficult to make a tatami room. It's very easy to change it to a hardwood floor. It's
yes,
very hard to make a tatami room.
yes,
So we kept the tatami and we're really happy with that. So
yeah,
that's
yeah. It's
interesting.
interesting. In terms of layout, though, imagine, I mean, houses of many kinds, but imagine if you have four tatami rooms sort of in a square, and there's fusuma, or maybe there's a wall between some of them. Maybe originally this one was wood floor from the old days, and the rest were tatami. But it's, in terms of planning, if someone wants to adapt something for a different reason, there's no reason not to turn the tatami room into a wood floor room. And yes, it's easier to turn a tatami room into a wood floor room than in reverse, because the tatami requires a depth, and the subfloor has to be lowered, and that means the wooden structure underneath the subfloor has to have that several centimeters of depth for it. It's a real pain to try to make that space later. An option you see often is then to make that a raised floor with tatami. And we see this. That's also a very traditional thing. I was at the Japan Mingekan yesterday, the folk craft museum, with some students from Sweden, from a wonderful cabinet making program that a friend of mine runs. And we went to the Mingekan, and we went to Yanagi Soetsu, his house, which is on the opposite side, the western side. And they had that beautiful layout with a wooden floored room with a beautiful dining table and chairs, and photos of them having a wonderful dinner in the 1930s, and then a step up to the room next to it, which was the tatami. So this definitely would work. This is definitely an option for anybody who's agonizing about how to change the wooden floor to tatami. Yeah, make a step up and that'll work. But it's interesting. People have to think, houses are living in their way. They accommodate to us. They learn from us in a way. There's a wonderful book by Stuart Brand called How Buildings Learn, and it's about how we change the buildings, and the buildings accommodate our changing needs and desires. And just because this particular layout or form is historically authentic doesn't mean it has to stay that way. And there's a lot of ways to change them to fit better. So yeah, we should take the freedom, approach it with a sense of freedom, and to find ways that this really suits what we want in our personality and expresses that.
That's awesome. I love that. Where is this next photo?
This is in the town, I want to say, I have one photo of Saseyama, Tamba Saseyama, and one photo of Iwami Ginzan. These are very similar. I think this is Iwami Ginzan, which again was restored very, very well. It's taken a bit of time, but restored very, very well into this old, kind of a post town, entering Iwami Ginzan, and on both sides of the street. Yeah, this is definitely Iwami Ginzan. The buildings, some of them are very old, Edo period. A lot of them are Meiji. There's even quite a few that are Showa, but they had that harmony. And as people were thinking about, how to, redesign or reconfigure things, partly for this expected influx of tourists because of the, World Heritage status, they basically did a very good job, in many cases, very simply making this quite harmonious and very traditional in feeling. So there's different shops, very good local economy, as I understand, and some other kind of spaces that are kind of special. Do you see a picture there that has like a candlelight? If you can put that up, I gave you one that had candlelight. And there's one other with candlelight. There's, again, the Gungendo people renovated one of the buildings on this, central road, simply to use as a candlelight space. For nighttime, for evening gatherings and events, poetry readings or music or something. And you go there, and this is a group I was with some years ago visiting. It's magical. We forget that the quality of light was in the evening from candles and from lamps, very, very different from what we expect. And it, again, lends a kind of magic to things, to everything. So this is like an artistic space, and there's some interesting new designs there. They made this big irori where people can sit around, etc. And this photo of the candles is also there. We forget that, and again, these candles have this wonderful aroma. The candle stands themselves. They have this. They're tall, and they bring the light to. If you're sitting on the floor, that becomes sort of an eye level light. So it's a really wonderful thing. So that's a wonderfully poetic thing to do, again, to kind of remind people of what the sensibility is that we're trying to preserve, what kinds of sensibilities we're trying to preserve. And in this case, it's an aesthetic space, which would be considered incredibly luxurious. But as we know, in many places, so many towns in Japan, these buildings are just vacant. They're shuttered. So why not simply renovate one? And they did a very light renovation. You can see the wall, the plaster's still, scarred and scraped. They did a very minimal cleanup and renovation and sort of left it the way it was and simply illuminated it. That's a beautiful thing.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I know in the town of Mitarai, who
Mm,
I know a few people who are trying to rebuild that traditional historical port town.
yeah.
And one of the things they're doing with the art festival and just opening up the houses that are vacant
Mm,
during the art festival time and just allowing people to put up art inside, just
mm-hmm.
clean it up, let people look inside of it. And
Yes.
that in itself adds appeal as well. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
This is interesting, and I just happened to be reading, a book, a translation from about Japanese contemporary art, and some of it is chronicling, projects and events and festivals that began to happen in rural areas, pretty much beginning in the 1990s. The Echigo Tsumari Festival, which is up in the Niigata area, was one great example, and that was one of the earliest ones where uh, people made homes or shops available for artists to do little installations and exhibitions, and it became a well-known thing. You've been to Naoshima, I'm sure. Naoshima has the art houses, and again, a lot of vacant houses that they were able to get use of, and doing often very, very ambitious. I mean, very well-known, prominent artists, world famous artists coming there to transform that house into an aesthetic experience for people. And this is happening in many places in Japan. And sometimes, as you mentioned, it may be a very brief event. In some places, there is the funding and the wherewithal, the vision and the organization to make it, a more permanent or sort of a long-term thing. But I think the lesson for me is that simply going into the old house is a wonderful experience. People, it's full of things that talk to you. It's full of things that, even if you're Japanese, it's still a bit unfamiliar. And what's with that beam? What's with that window? What's on the floor? And often when these sort of art projects are done, artists often maintain as much of that as possible. So it's an interesting thing that's been developing again for more than 20 years, and there's a lot of know-how about how to do that. Yeah, so I think that's a great example, and I would encourage them to do more, and hopefully you get some permanent things there that become a reason for people who are interested in art to come see that. So it can happen. We know, now Shima did it. Other places have done that. So it's definitely one of the approaches to, reutilizing old houses.
Yeah. This picture you have here reminds me a little bit of in Ehime. I visited a beautiful, charming traditional town which has really
Yeah.
been preserved called Uchiko. And they have these big outside, they look like engawas there, like
Yeah.
benches on the outside. And people, locals and visitors alike, when they walk up these long streets, they just sit and they
Yeah.
chat and they use it as a resting place. And I just thought, what a simple, beautiful idea.
And it's under the eaves, under the Noki. So if it's raining, you sit there for a little while and wait for the rain to stop. I mean, this is just very, ancient knowledge about how to make a street where people can be comfortable. But it's beautiful. And these probably, in many cases, they fold up at night. We have a lot of that in Kyoto. Maybe some of these don't, but it's a simple accommodation. What we call an affordance. It is a way to enable a certain function to happen. And this was common, I think, in many places in Japan in the old days. I'm from New Orleans. It was very similar in New Orleans. There was just lots of benches and seats and stuff under the balconies. Along the street would be covered with balconies, and there's all these shops. And then, the shop owners wanted people to hang out and come. They hang out for a while, they'll come into the shop. So that's just, normal human, town building knowledge.
Yeah, it makes sense. And
Mm,
people hang around, they're more likely to spend money.
exactly. Exactly. Again, New
Is,
Orleans, I'm looking forward because I'm going back to New Orleans for the first
are
time
you? Okay.
several years over Golden Week, and I won't be that long, but so much of what my thinking, my feeling about what's important in towns and buildings and houses and is due to having grown up in New Orleans and having seen the continuity of those approaches and that they're still valid, even though we're in the modern age. So much of that is still valid. It gets forgotten, it gets rediscovered. It's certainly places can become fake, and Disneyland, New Orleans has that aspect, but the simple thing of having a place where people can shelter from the rain or sit down and talk to somebody, this is so basic and human all over the world. You wonder why people forget that and make streets that don't have that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. You
yeah,
want places that people, enhances their lives,
yeah.
and they have shade as we're getting hotter and hotter times of year.
This
This looks
is
like a beautiful shady path. Where are we
Yeah,
looking at here?
this is the courtyard of the Gungendo main shop there in Iwami Ginzan. And I mentioned again, it was Sato Tak was the art director and worked on the design. And again, it's kind of a light touch, but magical. So obviously this sort of wooden pathway, that's going to be a new thing, but the buildings are primarily intact and extant. This wonderful vine above that was just this vine that was growing wild. They said, this is great, we're going to keep that. And they just simply made places and little entrances to go into one part of the shop or the other. And again, it's a journey. It's a like Japanese gardens often are. You don't really know what's going to be around that corner. You can't quite see yet. It's just a little curving path. It's a beautiful thing. And yeah, a lot of fun as well. So of course, all the pottery and things carefully placed, right? It's designed. It's not just left there because someone was, filming something. It's designed, but beautifully designed in a way that feels totally natural, and makes you want to explore.
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
yeah.
How about this one?
Yeah, this is the exterior of that house, with the candlelight. This is the
Okay.
daytime view. It looks really rough, right? They
Yeah.
barely did. You can see the entry door, how they sort of boarded that up and made a simple entryway, and then the amado, the shutters on the outside. They did that in a very, very simple way as well, and left it in a fairly weathered and aged state, which again is perfect. It's all there, and it's been there, waiting for us. You can look at the downspout, the drain pipe, etc. Bamboo, that's new, right? But again, fits in perfectly with the sense of the building. Yeah,
So very little remodeling going on, but they have that
yeah,
interesting idea of lighting it up with candles at
yeah,
night
yeah.
to
And in this photo, yeah,
create a romance. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And that photo you just showed again with the light, like simple things like the back wall just had this sort of bamboo or something sort of tacked to the wall, in front of the shoji in the back, and just another sort of interior layer. This sort of layered in a very simple way. Uh, and I would have to say, incredibly inexpensive to do this, but just again, for the sake of the aesthetics and as a place for people to come together. And this again. This ties back to what we're talking about: having a place to sit, on the street. This is about people having opportunities to run into each other, to strike up a conversation, to continue their relationships. And I think in a well designed or well evolved town, this happens as a kind of network of places around the town where people encounter each other and they talk, or they see someone else and they say, I was just talking to so and this is what happened. It's very pedestrian. They're not driving through this town. Of course, to get there, you probably need a car, but in the town, people are walking. So this is an important thing to understand how to enable that to emerge, and also how easy it is to kill it, which is one of the big lessons of the modern age.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that we saw in Fukushima
Yeah.
in the town of Odaka, right? That they
Mm,
have these outside communal gardens and communal
hmm.
sitting areas
Yes,
where they can strike up a conversation and check
that's
on
right.
each other. And
Yeah.
that's an important part of community building, right?
Yes, and as you know, you saw that Odaka, after the earthquake, there was a lot of seriously damaged buildings there, which were eventually demolished and taken down. So there's just a lot of vacant lots. You go to the town, it's has a life and a certain, let's say, a texture of vitality, but between one shop and the next, there may be two vacant lots, and across the streets there's going to be more vacant lots. So they've done a good job of sort of making use of those for, like you said, gardens or temporary events, or it's going to be a tea stall, or during the festivals is when it really, comes alive, and that street is lined with things, and all those lots are full of people doing things. But it's important, yeah, that these things are given life somehow, given an identity, that the definition of the place is somehow made. So this is the garden, you can do what you want here, or this is a place where you can just sit. This is enough. We think it has to be something super special. It doesn't have to be special. It can be, or often is, very mundane. Sometimes it's just a bus stop. Bus stops can be wonderful. If there's a place to sit, or something else, and you meet people, you talk. These things are kind of magic in their way. So yeah, Odaka, the people there really understand it. And as you know, some people are regretting that so many buildings were demolished. And this was partly because of the government policy that they would pay for it if they do it quickly. So a lot of buildings that didn't have a lot of damage were still demolished, because then they could get the money to rebuild something new. And in some cases, that's a clear, let's say, rational decision. In other cases, it's just, well, let's just go ahead and do it. So the town did sort of lose a lot of its its structure and texture because of that. But
Yeah.
and this is all up and down the Tohoku coast. I mean, every town has something similar, but Odaka, they kind of are into it and are showing, that there's a way to move forward and in a way that people who come from the outside are interested to see, right?
Yeah. And then when we saw entrepreneurs take over some of the old buildings
Yes.
and make it into new sake breweries, for
The
example,
sake brewery,
that
Haku,
was so
people
exciting,
from
right?
the outside coming in.
Yeah.
And it required having a few visionary people in the town who understood how important that would be and how good it could be. So yes, people coming in, and even the Hakuba Brewery in Odaka. That was not a very old building. That was like a Showa period building, or maybe even early Heisei building. But they did it in a way that showed the structure, and it had all that drama and wooden beams and things still. So really, 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 really well done. So that is always the key, and this is something that I want to talk about during the Minka Summit. Is it's one thing to preserve something, to restore it, uh, in a way that sort of freezes it in time, and where we can go and see how did people live back then. And there's lots of museum examples all through Japan where towns have somehow restored, sponsored the restoration of an old farmhouse, but it's simply like a museum. And what we really need throughout these small towns is younger people to come in. So the question is, what can you do that helps younger people see that there are opportunities here, that there's something nice, something beautiful, something meaningful that already exists that they can join to. Their fate, they're going to link their fate to the fate of this town for a while, and they want to stay there. And again, we talk about Fukushima, Odaka. There's a number of cases of younger people moving there because they saw those opportunities in places that I'm looking at. Iwami Ginzan is one. Tamba Saseyama is another place that I expect to talk about. It took a long time. It took about a decade, I think. But I think they were successful in doing that. So yeah, this is actually a house in Tamba Saseyama, a photo from a visit before the disaster, where what I saw happening in Tamba Saseyama. There was one local government person who had the vision to make Tamba Saseyama attractive for young people to move to. And one of the projects that he was looking at was restoring this beautiful old farmhouse, which was nestled right into the hills. And where I'm standing is a dandan batake, so it's a terraced rice field, and it's a beautiful old house. And his vision was that this would be transformed into a kind of culture center or conference center. And again, there was enough know-how to do that. Now, I don't think this succeeded. I'm looking at this and looking for more information about it. I don't think it succeeded. Maybe if it has, I'll know between now and when I talk on Saturday. But many other things this person implemented did. When I visited back in around 2010, there were in the town of Tamba Saseyama, which is in Hyogo Prefecture, was a Jokomachi, an old castle town. At the time, the castle was not really restored in any significant way. It was sort of beginning to be restored, but the old town was largely intact. It didn't suffer during the war. It had not had major disasters. There were quite a lot of old buildings, but they were vacant. The population was already aging, and nobody was there. These were becoming shuttered. And this town official, uh, had the idea to reach out to people. To let it be known that they were going to subsidize people who were willing to come to the town to take over an old machiya, an old townhouse, an old shop house, and do something new there. And when I was there, there was like one or two sort of more historical buildings that were important, and maybe two or three recent shops. Now, the whole town apparently is booming. It's just full of shops. It succeeded in turning itself into a tourist destination, particularly to see this old townscape. And when I was there at the time, again, this is 10 years ago, it was one of the shops was like a tea shop. It was a Chinese tea shop. Someone said, "We're going to make a shop that serves Chinese tea." That was 10 years ago. That was fairly visionary. Yeah, this is some of the old buildings there, and some of them again are preserved, partly as museums, partly as historical sites. But the main thing is that many people were able to move to the town and sort of revitalize the economic activity and the other activity of the town. And again, I'm thinking it took a decade. It took a decade. This is part of Tamba Saseyama. This is the village of Maruyama. And again, go back 10 years and look at what happened now. This town had several nice old farmhouses. And this town, official, he said, "We will help you restore and renovate these houses if you turn them into ryokan or lodging." And so several of the houses in this village of Maruyama became ryokan. And one of the interesting things was, you'd go there, you stay, it's nice, very well done. Even again, this is 13 years ago or so. The technical ability, there were enough carpenters there who knew how to do this well. Very well done, very comfortable. Everything we're talking about retrofitting the installation and making it comfortable is all there. Making nice, the kitchen, restoring the doma and everything in a place where people feel comfortable sitting. Also a nice wood stove so people can sit there at night and feed the stove. And in the morning, the women from the village come and bring breakfast. So they've like cooked breakfast at their own house and bring it and come and bring breakfast. I had a picture of that. And now, some of these inns are still running. They're continuing to run. It's been successful. And they've upped their cuisine game. There's also one very, very fine restaurant in the town, in this village as well. So this is the sort of thing people can do. But for it to really come together, yes, this is Sasayama. So we have to expect that it's going to take time, and that means a certain commitment to that. That means patience. That also means, in a way, accepting or adopting the time sensibility of people from the earlier generations who knew that you have to wait for good things. So I think it's really interesting, and there may be a few other examples I'll show that are in a similar way, and other places where there is potential.
Now, are they making the investment to dig the lines underground? Because I'm noticing these
Yes,
classic townscapes, they don't
there
have
you go.
lines.
They put the power lines underground. Again, that's a major infrastructure investment, but it's part of making the town feel right. And um, again, I'm not sure exactly when they did that, but that's definitely part of it. This is always one of the big challenges. It's kind of a running joke in Japan, right? Power lines, and some of us actually, we come to love them in a perverse way. you know, in my neighborhood, there's crows on them going ka ka ka. But
And sometimes the view of the sunset through all the lines is
it
quite
could be
picturesque.
dramatic. You can,
Yeah,
yeah,
uh,
authentic power lines. Yeah, you can.
authentic power lines,
This is Louise
Japan.
Poppy chiming in. Hi, Louise Poppy.
Yeah, that's
Uh,
right.
yeah. So
Mark has asked. He says he's enjoyed reading your books Just Enough and Japanese Dream House. Any more books on the way? Good question.
um, let's say in the conceptual stage, yes. In the actual writing stage, no. But I want to write a book about Fukushima and touching on some of the things we were talking about. Everyone talks about the disaster and the bad things that happened, but I want to talk about what I've learned from spending so much wonderful time with people in Fukushima. And so that's, let's say, in the note stage. But no other real book. I have other books, uh, sort of ready to go if a publisher wants them, in other aspects. But yeah, that's something for me I really want to think about and write about.
Yeah. Well, when you were guiding us around, your
Mm.
passion was so clear that
Thank,
that really would be a great book. You have so
me-
much depth of knowledge. Oh no, we've lost Asby. Oh dear. I'm sure he'll come back soon. I love looking at all these pictures that he sent me to talk about. Oh, there he is.
Connection drop out.
Oh, we
I was saying,
lost you for a minute.
yeah, I was saying
I wanted,
maybe we should have just recorded, me talking on the bus because
yeah, yeah.
I was talking for hours, right? We should have just
I caught a fair
recorded
bit,
that.
but yeah, I should have
Turned that
recorded
into a
the
book.
whole audio. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you
Mm.
about the houses. So under these are metal roofs, right?
Yeah, these are old thatch roof houses. These are kayabuki, but again, it was simply the cost issue at the time, as I understand it, and so they made them very well. I believe the thatch is still preserved underneath, but we see this very, very commonly. It would be nice to, if they were at some point restored to thatch, that would be nice, I suppose. But
Yeah.
they still are pretty nice, even the way they are,
They are.
especially
They're
because
beautiful.
it's the interior space. Yeah,
And
this is
then
one of the
here you have
historical
the
homes.
thatch and you
Yeah.
have a window in the top, which is
Oh,
interesting.
well, yes, but the gate, often the gable end, of Japanese farmhouses, or this is actually a gatehouse, sort of a samurai house, and again, there's sort of this what would you call it? Many samurai lived in rural areas, and they were still doing farming and other things. And so in many rural parts of Japan, samurai houses are very similar to farmhouses. So this, I think, the fact that it's a gatehouse is what tips it off. But yeah, this would be mainly for the smoke to get out. And we see this very, very commonly. And this goes back actually like to the Jomon period. If you look at how they built these thatched pit dwellings in the Jomon period, thousands of years BC, they had that same little window up at the top of the roof under the ridge for the smoke to get out.
Yeah. And you have this great picture
Yeah.
showing the underside of the thatch. It is just incredible. I always
Yeah.
show people when we're doing tours the underside because it's incredible to look at, isn't it?
Yeah, it's beautiful, right? And again, in this case, this was the underside of the thatch of that first farmhouse in Sasayama I showed you, which the roof is in really bad shape, but the underside was in good shape. It's like the upper layers, and it depends on which side of the house. One side was worse than the others. Upper layers look bad. You go around to the back, where it was in better shape, even under the eave. So, yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then is this a ranma that they have repurposed for the front?
This is more like an Udatsu. I believe this is actually the house that was turned into the Chinese tea shop.
It's
So again, it
beautiful.
may have been an antique carved board that they put in there to use as a kind of sign for the shop. But this town has some beautiful Udatsu. Udatsu are these sort of wings that stick out from the facade that have these own little roofs, which was a sort of a sign of shops. And the more elaborate they were, the more prosperous the merchant was. And this is something that we find in many parts of Japan. So it's kind of interesting, sort of a sign, a carved sign, which Rama are rarely vertical, right?
Yeah.
So this was definitely some other thing, yeah.
Yeah, beautiful.
Mm.
And then looking at the design of this
Yeah,
house.
this
So this isn't
This
thatch.
was
This
this
is
this was the castle, the what's part
okay.
on the castle grounds. They've restored parts of the castle, etc. And again, this is a major investment on the part of the town, and of course the Bunka Cho, that cultural ministry will be involved in that. It takes a long time to do that. A lot of hoops to jump through in order to get permission and funding from the cultural ministry to do this sort of thing. But yeah, now it's restored to enough where people would want to come see it.
It's
Not a very
beautiful.
big castle, it's sort of a small castle town.
And again, no wires overhead, I
No
noticed.
wires here. No wires. Yeah.
And is that compressed wood on the roof? It's not, it predates thatch, doesn't it?
No, this is shingle. It's a
Shingle.
shingle roof. So what we call in English cedar shakes. So yes, Hiwarabuki. It's a very common roofing, fairly let's say high grade. We would, I mean, often you see them on temples, and sometimes this would be on a castle building. It's a fairly high grade thing. You'll see them on tea houses as well. Um, it's very labor intensive, and also requires upkeep. So it's less rural than a thatch roof. but often, even places that were originally roofed with that cedar shingles, eventually they would be converted to a tile roof. Tile is just very, very durable, much more durable, and in fact less labor intensive to both, install in the first place and to maintain. But it's beautiful. I'm sure you've seen them many places. I remember the first time I first visited Kyoto, 30 something years ago, and going to Ryoanji Temple, and there were places where I could just see that really up close and going, my God, that's exquisite. It's
Yeah.
exquisite.
We have it at Itsukushima Shrine in Miyajima.
Yes, yes, yes.
Absolutely beautiful.
But again, it's very expensive, and there's been quite a revival of thatching, I think, especially since Shirakawa Go was made into a World Heritage Site. Many people went there. It was required for them to maintain that, so they had to have constant training for thatchers to do that. And I think many people who trained there went to other parts of the country, or they were already from other parts of the country, came there to learn. And now you can find good thatchers all around the world. I think it's harder to find people who can do a good cedar shingle roof, and you'll find very few instances where the money's there to do it.
Yeah. There is one section I always point out to guests where you can see a recent remodel of it.
Oh yeah,
And so that gives me hope that there's still the knowledge,
it, it,
that there are still craftspeople who know how to do it.
there are, and hopefully there will be more as more people want to do that. But yeah, it's this intricate thing. I mean, it's hard to talk about it without a picture, but of course, when you look at from the edge, at the eaves, these shingles are in these layers, just dozens of layers, and at the bottom there are again the cedar wood in a slightly thicker pieces that are like on an angle, and this wonderful rhythm that sort of goes across that, and which is sort of supporting that from the bottom. It's just a beautiful, to me, very Japanese, and reflects the Japanese sensibility. I mean, this architecture basically came from China and Korea in the ancient days, where they were basically doing tile roofs, but the Japanese, to make this out of wood and shingles, was a very local aesthetic, I think, and they do it as an exquisite, to do it as beautifully as possible. So yes, that may be something we should start to look around, is who can do good cedar shake roofs.
Yeah, it's passing on. So that's the same thing I feel when you see a temple or a building that has new tile, new
Mm,
traditional Japanese tile. And I'm thinking, on the one hand, there's so much disused old tile that could be reused, but isn't that great that they're teaching and
yeah,
preserving the culture for new craftspeople to keep working on that,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I think uh, most of the tiles we see are basically mass produced these days. And there are people, though, who do them by hand. There are places, I remember visiting some craftspeople in Yamanashi a few years back, who had made a kiln, a kama, specifically for doing roof tiles. And of course, the hand fired ones are different. They have a beautiful irregularity. The machine made ones, they're wonderful, and the outer, it's scientifically determined, the outer glazing, the outer firing is going to be so many millimeters thick, or microns thick, and we know how long it's going to last and how resistant it'll be. But the older tiles, the handmade ones, in fact, are more receptive to a bit of moisture coming in, maybe a bit of moss growing on them. They have a different relationship with the environment, and so it's great that we have enough production in mass production to do something that's still very, very beautiful. But yeah, there are people here and there in Japan who are still doing it by hand. Not cheap, but you can do that.
Yeah. I've seen some innovation with traditional tile making too. Some young entrepreneurs are doing new designs. So it looks like a
Mhm.
traditional tile, but there's something new and unique about it. And people are using it as wall art. So
Yeah,
they're, yeah, really nice to see.
there's a lot of decorative potential, especially because the tiles at there's so many types of tiles, and but often if it's the round tile, the end at the end of the eaves, it they were embossed with a sort of symbol like that relates to the temple, for instance, or maybe if it's a a castle or a permanent house with the family crest or something. But there's a lot of decorative potential for someone who wants to play with that. And we have these forms, typical round tiles, or hiwadabuki, which is sort of the dish-shaped tile, and at the edge of the eaves they have a room for decoration. So if someone wants to play with that, there's a lot of room. I mean, I would love to see that sort of thing.
Yeah. I've seen the one that I saw is making the Onigoara,
The
right? The
Onigoara,
demon,
that's of course totally decorative.
and making it into a frame that you can put it on your wall. I love that idea.
There you go. Yeah, Onigoara, of course, and there's so much regional variation. That's sculpture.
Yeah.
That is, tile art from the beginning, from way back. And of course, if someone wants to like do something innovative with that, they certainly can.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to talk to another tile geek. I'm always talking about
Yeah,
tiles on my
I
tours.
wonder. I don't know if there'll be any tile people at the Minka Summit, but
Oh,
definitely
wouldn't that be
it's
fun?
worth building that network, isn't it? Because
Absolutely.
people want that. It's a bit expensive, can be expensive, but not more expensive than thatch, or less expensive than thatch in many cases. And I think there's ways to use some less expensive tiles, mass produced ones, and then link that with some beautiful Onigoara or something that's really decorative. And in fact, people probably underestimate how accessible it is to actually ask a craftsman, a clay craftsman, a potter, to make something for you, to make your own unique Onigoara. I think that's definitely something people can do.
Oh, that would be really
Yeah,
exciting, wouldn't it? To have and take home to your house
take
wherever you're
your
coming
house.
from, right?
Take home to your house. Yeah. Because there's lots of potters. That's one of the wonderful things of all the traditional crafts that have suffered, and it's hard to keep alive. Pottery is so vibrant in Japan. There's so many potters, beautiful handmade dishes. They're I'm often surprised at how inexpensive they are. For how beautiful they are. So there's lots of potters, and there's a lot of people I think who would be very interested to take on that kind of order.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to get Robert Yellen on the case.
Robert
Makes
Yellen. I hope is he coming? I don't know.
I don't know if he's coming to the Minka Summit, but he's
He knows he
always
knows the
supportive of pottery everywhere.
he
Yeah,
knows the potters for sure.
he
So
knows the potters. Well, thank you so much, Asby. That was a wonderful preview, a little bit of
yeah,
insight about what you're going to talk about at Minka Summit. And it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so
yeah, great
much.
to talk to you too. Time flies. I was thinking, how are we going to fill an hour? And it's like we're just warmed
Easy.
up. So
Yeah, yeah,
we'll do it
easy.
again. And I look forward to our events. Over the weekend at the Minka Summit in Aichi, and yeah, look forward to seeing you and everybody else. And now we're really like a community. So it's really wonderful that we support each other and we have so much in common.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will have the chance to talk to you on Sunday,
Yes,
as you are part of the Minka Masters
yes,
panel that
yes,
I will be the moderator for. So that'll
yeah.
be really fun. And
That'd
then
be
you
great.
have your talk about community development and
Yes,
preserving,
have that.
restoring,
I
renovating
also
old
will do a
houses.
book talk. I mean, like a book reading
Oh,
in
book
the
reading.
afternoon on
Awesome.
Saturday. I think the time slot between like 4:30, 5:30 p.m. There's many authors coming this time, which is really wonderful. So we have some time to read, like 10 minutes or so for each of us to read a bit of our books. So
Oh, how
uh,
fantastic. And many of the authors who I've interviewed
I think
on my show, I'm so excited to
I
see
think you
in
know
person.
everybody. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Louise and Mark, for
Everybody.
your
Yeah, Mark.
fantastic questions and
Yeah.
comments. Yeah. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.